Did you know that the Hassayampa Inn in Prescott, Arizona is considered one of the most haunted historic hotels in America? We'll discuss this and other interesting facts about author Howard Gershkowitz's unique writing and publishing journey on this episode of The Curious Professor. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. B. Welcome to the Curious Professor podcast, where I take listeners on a journey of discovery to explore the people, places, artifacts, and natural wonders that spark my curiosity. On this episode of the Curious Professor podcast, we'll discuss the journey from financial advising to authorship with writer Howard Gershkowitz. But first, a trivia question. How much do taxpayers in the USA lose each year to Medicare and Medicaid fraud? I'll have the answer for you at the end of this episode. I'm thrilled to have Howard Gershkowitz on the show today. Howard spent the last 40 years as a financial advisor and stockbroker. He always wanted to be a published author, so he made the decision 12 and a half years ago to pursue his dream. He now has 2 published novels with a 3rd on the way and a 4th under construction. He is also a published poet, short story writer, and public speaker. Most recently, Howard was one of the established writers included in the anthology Journeys to Authorship. Welcome to the show, Howard. It's great to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to join and be here with you. Thank you, Karen, for having me.
And what's the most unique thing about you?
The most unique thing about me is that I don't fit into too many boxes. We chatted earlier before the podcast began, and I chose a path that was different from most other people because I just didn't fit into being a 9-to-5 kind of guy. So I've been kind of an entrepreneur and a traveler and a journeyer, and I think that probably is what makes me unique.
You recently participated in an anthology called Journeys to Authorship. Tell us about that project.
Well, I belong to a group of authors called Always, and we're all published authors, but we've all taken different journeys to get where we were. We meet regularly every month for lunch, sometimes for breakfast or coffee. And the idea surfaced from our fearless leader, Ann Vidian, who's also an editor herself. And she says, we ought to tell our stories. And we went round and round about it. And finally, we decided, let's make this formal. So we put out an application to all the members. And anyone who responded had the opportunity to write a 3,500-word essay about how they became an author and how they became published. It took quite a few months to gather all those stories, get them edited, put all the personal information together, the bios and so forth. And I thank Ann Vidian very, very much for her hard work, as well as everybody else who participated in the process. But it just seemed to come together. So ultimately, 14 of us were able to get our essays and autobiographies, I guess you would call them, 3,500 words done. And then we went through the process of getting to Amazon and KDP and getting it published and edited and so forth. The last few weeks were quite challenging as they kept coming back and wanting more and more information. But eventually they got it done, and we're very pleased it came out about 3 weeks ago. And that day it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon.
It's great. And I know quite a few of you who are in that anthology, and you're all just really wonderful people in addition to being fantastic authors. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes where people can purchase that.
Thank you very much. It's both obviously in print and in ebook. We are also participating in panel discussions around the Valley. So for instance, on May 11th, we'll be at the Tempe Library where 4 of us, including Ann and myself, we'll be discussing the book and answering questions for author wannabes. And essentially, that's really the purpose of the book. Not only, it's egotistical, of course, to think that people want to read about our stories, but more than that, we specifically wanted to write these with tips and advice for anyone else who wants to become an author. And we've decided that we're going to take the show on the road, and we're booking opportunities for people to come meet us hear our story and ask questions. I know I did a lot of asking along my own path. And if I hadn't met Anne, if I hadn't met you, for example, and gotten all the great advice I had gotten, who knows if I would have published anything at all. So it's an old story that it takes a community to raise an author, and I truly believe that.
And tell us what's unique about your journey to authorship.
Well, I think most people have a desire to write. I certainly did. I've kept a journal for most of my life, so I had a lot of material to write from. I've always been a reader, so I've read thousands of books over the years. But I also understood that you got to get started at some point, and that's the hardest part. So I put a hard stop for myself at age 55 because I had talked to other authors and discovered that it takes probably 10 years, sometimes longer, before you can actually become successful in the writing field. So I said, at age 55, if I haven't started by then, I'm going to. So I talked to my son. He said, Dad, why don't you go back to school? I said, no. And he said, Dad, the local community colleges have great teachers, great professors. Some of them are published themselves, and you could use the help. Well, he's my son, and I finally acquiesced, and I started taking school classes at the local community colleges. And sure enough, it still took me 8 years to get it done. But as a result, I was able to get my first published book, which was The Operator. And now I'm actually working on my fourth book. The third one's at my publisher. So I just basically said, I'm going to start at 55, come heck or high water. And I did.
And you mentioned your book, The Operator. Your other published novel is Not on My Watch. Can you tell us a little bit about those two books?
Okay. Well, the interesting thing is I actually wrote Not on My Watch first. I was taking some classes. I wrote a short story by the same title. And when I presented it to class, my classmates all looked at me and says, okay, what's the next chapter? I said, huh? And I realized, okay. So I came back the following class and I wrote another chapter. And they said, okay, what comes next? And I realized I had a book. So I worked on that probably for about a year and a half. I completed it and I thought, I'm going to be on the top of the New York Times bestseller list with this one. I started submitting it to agents and I went the traditional route, and all I got were rejection letters, very typical, which was very discouraging. So I kind of put it aside, and then I was up at the Hacienda Inn in Prescott shortly thereafter, and that's an inn built in 1926. It's got an old switchboard right there in the lobby. And I was looking at that, wondering what it would be like to see someone actually operating, pulling and pushing the plugs and talking to people. Next thing I know, in my mind, I'm back in 1929 trying to stop the Great Depression. So that interested me enough. I wrote through that book, except this time I did it differently. I actually went through a novel intensive workshop with a couple of authors by the name of Stephen James and Bob Dugani. They critiqued it for me. They helped me quite a bit. I then had Anne edit it, Anne Vidian, submitted it, and shortly thereafter, All Things That Matter Press took it. After that one was produced, I went back to Not on My Watch thinking, okay, if I got the first one done, let me see if I can get the second one done. I started reading it and I realized why I got all the rejection letters, because it was not very good. So I went back to that same novel intensive workshop, had it reworked. I totally rewrote it. And when I submitted it to my publisher, he took it sight unseen. So that's how the second one, which really was the first one, got published.
And what do you find most challenging about writing novels?
Well, obviously, they're much longer than writing a short story or a poem. I write those as well, and it's very satisfying to be able to do something in just a few hours or just a few weeks. But a novel, and I know that there are people who can sit down and just write for hours and hours and days at a time. I'm not like that. So realizing that I can only write for maybe an hour or two every day, I knew that writing a novel would take quite a bit of time. And it was not only was the writing far off, but then there would be the editing and the revising and then submitting it, see if I can get it published. And then they're going to do their editing and so forth. So knowing that the project could take a year or two or even longer before it actually turned into something material, that's a challenge. To be able to get yourself to sit down every day in a chair and write, knowing that you may only write 1 or 2 pages. Sometimes I write 1 or 2 paragraphs, but I just say, you know what, this is how I'm going to get to the end.
Even a few words a day will eventually add up to a novel.
One of the motivational speakers that I loved, he's no longer with us, said, if you only wrote one page a day, which you wrote 5 days a week for 50 weeks, you'd have a 400-page novel. And that's pretty darn good.
And what do you love most about writing?
Well, I'm somewhat of an introvert and a loner. So it's the kind of thing that you, of course, do by yourself. You don't do it with a crowd. I do spend time at Starbucks. That's one of my favorite places to write. And of late, the music there tends to be a little louder than it used to be. But I've gotten some really good noise canceling headphones that work perfect. I put them on. I've got some white noise that I listen to. And even though I may be in a crowd of 10 or 15 people all chatting and listening to the music and sharing coffee, I'm by myself.
And do you have any tips for people who would like to write a novel but maybe aren't sure where to start?
Well, I'm going to give the same advice that my son gave me. There are still wonderful classes available here at the community college level. The Piper Writing Center at ASU offers lots of workshops that people can take advantage of. They're not that expensive. And not only that, but of course, on YouTube and all the various different social media channels, lots of great classes. If anybody's interested after this, they want to contact me, I can give you a list. In fact, I offer a workshop where I talk about some of this, and I have a list of the various different places you can go to get training. If you're going to start from scratch and you're not really sure where to start, there's the place where you need to seek out help.
If you were having a dinner party, what three writers, living or dead, would you most want to invite?
Well, Clive Cussler would have been one. He's my favorite author. He has passed away, but I did get the chance to meet him before. So, in fact, the picture that you see on the back of my books is a cropped picture of when I met him at the Poison Pen at Scottsdale. So that's kind of my memory of him. But he'd be one, Stephen King would be the other, and J.K. Rowling would be the third.
And you mentioned that you're currently working or in the process of publishing your third book and then working on your fourth. Can you give us a little preview of what those two books entail?
Sure. Book 3 is called Special Delivery. I had written a series of short stories called The Post Office Box Mysteries, where I have a post office box in Tempe that I've had for many years. And one day I walked in there and I said, there's a story behind every one of these. And then it struck me, there's a story behind every one of these. So I wrote a series of 10 short stories. The last one was called Special Delivery. Now, in all those stories, there were two characters that were postal clerks, Stanley and Marianne. And so I decided, I'm going to write a story about them. I saw a news article about, assisted suicide in Oregon. I said, I wonder what would happen if someone here ordered one of those devices off the black market, which you can do, and the postal clerk, Stanley, gets it and is going to hand deliver it, thinking that he's going to have this postal customer fall in love with him. But she's up in Fargo because she's a snowbird. And so he decides he's going to drive it to her. And the whole story is about his attempt to deliver this to her, thinking he's going to be gallant, not knowing that she intends to use it to emulate herself. I won't tell you the ending there, but he does make it to Fargo. The next book is going to be called The Painting, and that is also based on a short story. I wrote one for the Tempe Library/ASU Creative Writing Contest last year, and it took first place. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to turn that into a book. It's based on a true story. One of my writing companions in one of my other writing groups used to be an activities director at a rehab facility. There was an artist there who worked in glass who had been in a car accident, was in a wheelchair, and was convinced that he'd never be able to return to his craft. And through her encouragement, he did, in fact, begin working again, even though he couldn't stand up. I changed it from a glass to a painter, but I did keep Andrea in the story. She is still the activities director there. And I just expanded that of her assisting him to become, once again, a productive painter.
And is there anything else you'd like to tell us about you or your work?
No, I've been morphing things into public speaking arrangements. I put together a number of seminars and workshops specifically to help authors, whether existing authors or up and coming. And I'm finding that that's been very, very satisfying to be able to go and talk to people, share them my story with them, just like we're going to be doing with Journeys to Authorship. And I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from that and a lot of positive feelings for being able to know that I'm giving back because so many people helped me to get where I'm at. And if I can do that, if any of your audience has a group that they want me to come speak to, I don't charge anything. Just if you want to buy my book, you can buy my book, no obligation. But I think the most important thing that I'm trying to do now is to give back to the same writing community what's been given to me.
And where can listeners find out more about you?
Okay. They can go to my website, which is gershwriter.com, GERSHWRITER.com, or you can find me on Facebook. I'm there as Gershwriter. I'm also there as Howard Russell. That was going to be my pseudonym. It's Russell is my middle name. So if you look up on Facebook, Howard Russell, you'll find me there, or you can find me there under Gershwriter.
It was great to have you on the show, Howard. Thank you so much for taking time to be a guest on the Curious Professor podcast.
And I appreciate all your help as well, and have a wonderful afternoon.
And now for the answer to this episode's trivia question. How much do taxpayers in the USA lose each year to Medicare and Medicaid fraud? According to the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association, taxpayers in the USA are losing more than $100 billion a year to Medicare and Medicaid fraud. We'll end the show with something punny. Where do ghosts buy their clothes? A boutique. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Curious Professor podcast. If there's a person, place, artifact, or natural wonder that has sparked your curiosity and you'd like for me to feature it on the show, please let me know. My website is thecuriousprofessorpodcast.com. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe to the Curious Professor podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to become part of my community of curiosity seekers, be sure to visit my website, thecuriousprofessorpodcast.com, and join Dr. B's Hive. Until next time, always be learning and be curious with Dr. B.